So welcome everybody to our legislative update. We're just starting to do these for this session, partially because we now have some more interesting technology to help us out with doing legislative updates. If you haven't already, introduce yourself in the chat. Becky has a sign-in link that we're going to be dropping sometime soon, and that way we can just know who's coming here, who's interested in doing this type of work moving forward. All right. And if you don't already know, this is Greater Lafayette Indivisible. We're a progressive activist organization. We're headquartered in Tippecanoe County, Indiana. We got a website. You can learn more about what we're doing. And my name is Chris Hegarty. I use he, him pronouns, and I've been organizing Indivisible since 2017, which is, wow, 4 years now. All right. I want to move through really quickly. I think that most of the people here already know this information, but we're also putting this up on our YouTube page for folks for future reference. So I just want to get this information down about what we're dealing with and how things kind of work in the General Assembly. So here are just some really basic bullet points. The General Assembly is split into two houses. We have a state house and a state senate. They're both apportioned based on population. And there are, of course, 100 members of the Indiana House and 50 state senators. They meet biennially, which is the one that means once every 2 years. And they have two cycles, a long cycle where they do the state's biennial budget, so the budget for every 2 years, and then the short session where they do not do that. They run a shorter session where they deal with other issues. We have a part-time legislature. Sometimes people will call this a citizens legislature, and that means that the people who are in this legislature are not doing so full-time. They work part-time, and wow, does it show. All right, another thing that we have are strict timelines for our legislature. Our legislature is kind of run by a fairly strict set of rules in order to keep things moving. The legislative session technically begins back into I think in December, but for all intents and purposes of passing laws and voting on them and meeting in committees, it starts in January and runs through April. In another part of the General Assembly that's fairly important is the power of committees. This is something that comes up time and time again when we're looking at which bills move and which ones don't. And it really depends on which committees they move to, who the committee chair is, what the composition of the committee is, and what the committee wants to get done. In Indiana, one of the most important requirements for bills is that they be read on 3 separate days, right? So they have 3 separate readings of a bill before it can become law. There are also a lot of other legislative rules, right? So the House has a couple hundred, the Senate has a hundred or so, and then they have some concurrent rules that are for both houses. And some of them are just the form in which they will do lawmaking, and some of them are more interesting rules about how bills can be moved around and how policies can be changed, inserted or removed from certain bills. One important thing that we're dealing with this year that we don't deal with all years is the state budget. The state budget's only done once every 2 years, and it includes there's a lot of policy in the budget, right? A budget is somewhat a statement of values, and in a state where, like in most states, the largest chunk of money goes to public education and maintenance of the state's healthcare system. It's very important to keep an eye on the budget as well separately, even though it is sometimes a different animal from dealing with other legislation. All right, move on here. All right, here's the simple way that a bill gets passed in the Indiana legislature. There are some steps before this, so this is very simplified. Obviously, there are study committees where legislative ideas come from, and interest groups that might just write your legislation for you, and then you can just pass it along to legislative services or whatever. But broadly, a policy idea from a legislator is sent to legislative services, which is a group within the state house that their only function is to write legislation. The bills are assigned a number. They get a House bill or a Senate bill, depending on which house they're in. And then those bills are assigned to a committee. One thing, the committee chair determines which bills will be heard in the committee. Just because a bill is sent to a committee doesn't mean it has to get a hearing. So sometimes earlier and at certain points in the session, we'll be lobbying committee chairs, right? Specifically, particularly if they're in our area on different issues. The committees will hear, amend, and vote to advance or not advance a bill. After that, the bill will move to a full chamber and may or not be voted on or amended in particular circumstances. It's easier to amend legislation in the Senate than it is in the House. So typically you'll see more attempts to amend legislation on the Senate floor, particularly from Democrats who might be locked out of the process in other spaces. After a bill passes one house, it goes to the other, and we repeat. The differences between the bills are reconciled through a reconciliation committee, and they produce through a conference committee. My bad. And they produce a report that has to be adopted by both houses. After those things happen, the bill that's been passed by both houses can be signed by the governor. It can be passed passively, or it can be vetoed. And if it's vetoed, it goes back into the houses and needs to pass with a higher threshold. So that's kind of the basic idea of how a particular bill can be made into law. There are a lot of ways around that, right? You can always take language out of a bill and put it into another bill. There are a number of bills that are designated to be vehicle bills. So basically blank bills that are not used until there's a policy that needs an empty bill to be filled with its with its policy in the other chamber. So there are a lot of other ways that you can kind of get into the process, but this is sort of just a simple overview of how it works on paper. Um, so right now we're in the second half of the long session. So there are no new bills being filed. Obviously, the deadline for that was quite a long time ago, and the bills that have not moved in their original chamber cannot move this session. That doesn't mean that whatever is in the bill can't be moved to another bill, but the bill itself, that numbered bill, will not move this session. April 19th is the last day for the House to adopt conference reports and vote on Senate bills, and April 20th is the last day for the Senate to adopt conference reports and vote on House bills. So that's the last day that we'll be seeing people voting just for this session. And then the last day for the session is April 29th. We had some priorities for earlier this session, right? So at the Resistance Fair, we talked about some bills that we really wanted to see move. And we have some good news and some bad news and some ugly news, right? So there were some bad bills that didn't move this cycle that we're really happy about. One is SB 289 that would strip same-sex couples of certain parental rights. HB 1070, HB 1327, and SB 42. Those were targeting police divestment efforts. SB 224, which prohibited gender-affirming care to minors, and one version of SB 353. Right, this is on the bad problem bills that didn't move and the problem bills that may be moving list, because SB 353 was originally a bill that would have added a citizenship requirement for voter registration. So it would have added, you would have had to provide something like a passport or a birth certificate in order to register to vote. I think most of us here have done a lot of voter registration and understand that that would severely undercut voter registration efforts across the board, right? So that language was taken out very quickly, probably because the folks writing it realized that it was very flatly unconstitutional. This type of policy was already struck down in Kansas a couple of years ago. That being said, we have some problem bills that are going to be moving, or that have moved over. One of them is HB 1577. That's called the Telemedicine and Abortion-Related Services Bill. It's really quite larger, and we'll get to that in a moment. Another one is SB 353. This one popped up again with different language. It was amended, and now it includes other things not related to the citizenship requirement for voting, but they're nonetheless still pretty bad. And then we also have recently moving some educational priorities from the Republican supermajority, namely the education savings accounts and voucher expansion in HB 1005, and similar policies that are also present in the budget, which is HB 1001. Lastly, one thing that we've also been kind of looking at over the last couple of weeks is the wetlands bill, and that's SB 389. That would repeal all of Indiana's wetlands protection law. That law very specifically was designed to cover up some of the gaps in Clean Water Act that leave what we call like seasonal wetlands or occasional wetlands unprotected. There was a Supreme Court case in the early 2000s that sort of left states in the situation of needing to provide regulations for these seasonal wetlands. Indiana did so, and now it seems like the state would like to leave those areas completely unprotected. This is kind of an alarming development. All right. We also supported some bills, and unfortunately, a lot of those did not move, right? It's kind of difficult to get progressive bills moving in a Republican supermajority House and in a Republican trifecta. A few good bills that made more progress this year included the driver's cards bills. Those were SB 319 and 1138. In particular, SB 319, the driver's cards bill in the Senate, is now a bipartisan bill as it has Republican co-authors on it. So it's really good to see that even though some of these policies aren't getting through and becoming law, they are gaining traction within the state house. There are more and more people who do them. One important thing to note also is that 1138, the driver's cards bill, was carried by Chris Campbell, who we endorsed for the last couple of cycles. So we're really glad to see candidates getting out there and carrying those good bills. Another good bill that didn't move was 1133, that would have placed vote by mail system in place for the 2024 election. Vote by mail is a really great type of policy, and we know that it works, right? So this is something that is a really great idea, and moving forward on that in the coming years will be a big priority. Another bill that was really great this cycle, and another one that Chris co-authored that was also a bipartisan bill, was the Paid Family Medical Leave Program, 1136. This bill would have created a paid family medical leave program in the state that's paid for by employer contributions and I think payroll tax as well. So this was another bill that didn't move this cycle, but is getting more attention because folks are recognizing that these are the types of bills that we need in the state. So with that, let's move on to what we're doing today. And I'm sorry for the long preamble. I'm really trying to keep this as short as possible to respect your time. What we're doing today is we're writing emails. We're going to write some emails using fast action to our representatives. We're going to make a couple calls as well. And we're going to start sharing some forms out so that we can get more people to do the same, right? Because we really do want to get more people out with their representatives, talking to them. And fortunately, it's a lot easier now than it used to be because we are using fast action. All right. There are a couple things. We're not going to have to do as much message crafting because we've already done a bit of it with fast action. But there are a few things to go over about, like, writing and leaving messages to elected officials. I think a lot of folks here have already done this before, so this is probably information that you already know. But one of the most important things is to identify yourself when you're talking to an elected official, relevant personal information, where you are, to prove that you're a constituent, more or less, and then your name. Friendly and respectful tone or writing style. It's a good idea if you're trying to get somebody to do something to be as pleasant to them as possible. That doesn't mean that we're going to compromise on the substance of our asks, but it does mean that we're not going to go in calling somebody a rotten SOB or something like that. Number three, clear and limited subject and scope. Sometimes this is difficult for me because I get on my keyboard and I want to write about everything that is wrong with what is going on right now. And sometimes, for dealing with elected officials in particular, you want to kind of stick to one subject and one issue. They don't have much of an attention span, these ones. No, but if you keep it to one issue, then that means that you can say, I want a specific action on this bill, right? Asking questions for clarity is great. It is quite literally the job of elected officials to keep you up to date on some of these things. So you should always feel free to ask them questions about what they're doing. A lot of them are actually pretty excited to tell you about things that they're up to. So that's good to know. And then the ask, right? So what we're asking folks to do, typically, it has to be something specific, right? In general, if we're talking to legislators, we really want to ask them for a specific yes or no vote on a specific thing, right? A lot of times it's kind of easy to say something like, well, we'd like you to stand for public education, right? And legislators will always say, well, we do, and then they will vote against public education. So we don't really want to give legislators an opportunity to say we stand for something without actually taking the vote. So we're going to ask legislators to for a very specific vote on a very specific issue and tell them what we think about it, right? Okay, let's move on. Okay, so the first bill that we're going to be dealing with today is Senate Bill 353. This is an elections bill. Its original language was the very unconstitutional proof of citizenship requirement for voter registration in Indiana. It was removed and replaced with other election-related priorities. Currently, the bill seeks to remove the governor and state board of elections authority to expand absentee voting or change election dates during a state of emergency. It also adds another verification to the absentee ballot process by requiring absentee ballot applicants to put the last four of their social on or their driver's license number on their absentee ballot application. So this one really isn't a great idea. It's not the absolute disaster for voting that it used to be, but it's still a bill that's opposed by voter rights organizations, including the ACLU. So this is something that it's one of those sort of small looking bills that taken together really adds to voter disenfranchisement in the state. So that's the first bill. All right, so we're gonna take a couple minutes. I don't think it's gonna take 5 minutes to do this because it's pretty simple, but we're gonna write an email and leave a message about this with our representatives. I think I can't see the chat right now, but Becky, do you have the link for that?
Yes, it is in the chat.
Okay, cool. All right, so there's a link to a fast action form for SB 353. A couple of you have probably already done this, but if you haven't, because this was the one that we kind of trialed earlier, you can use the messaging to write an email to urge your Indiana representative to oppose 353. We'll route it to your Indiana House member, so for purposes of the email, you don't even need to know who it is. And then you can also take and copy that link and share it on your social media or email to your friends. I also wanted to leave some time to do phone messages really quick because these really only take a couple of minutes. And for phone messages, what I've been doing when I call my representative, who is Don Leahy, what I've been doing is just reading off the scripts, right? So I just wanna, I'll mute myself and we can take just 2 or 3 minutes to finish those up really quick, if that works for everybody. Cool? All right.
Physical form.
Well, thank you. And if anybody has any questions about what to write or any additional like comments or anything else about the form or about SB 353, just go on ahead and yell them out. We got a pretty small group here, so. Okay, this one is this one's a little bit different. This is HB 1577, and for those of us who've been on either Planned Parenthood's action alerts or the ACLU's action alerts, or locally YWTF and Surge's action alerts, you've probably heard about this one pretty frequently. This is the earlier in the session, this was called the telemedicine abortion bill. I think it's still being called that, but it's basically turned into the omnibus abortion bill, right, which was actually 1557 this cycle. So a lot of the ideas that would normally be in a big abortion bill have kind of been shoehorned into this one, and a lot of them, and wow, like all of them, are really bad. The main policy of 1577 is a ban on telemedicine services to provide information about reproductive care, including abortion, or to use telemedicine services to prescribe abortion-inducing drugs. And it also requires that those drugs be taken in presence of a physician. This bill extends a religious exemption for healthcare providers to mental health care providers, adds more targeted restrictions for abortion providers, and requires healthcare providers to provide misinformation about abortion reversal procedures. This is something that I think a lot of folks have probably seen in the press over the past couple of weeks, but there are a lot of things in this bill that are very basic problems, right? Either from First Amendment perspective of the constitutionality of telling doctors how they need to deal with their patients, right, and what types of information they need to give, particularly when the information is not medically sound or potentially unethical to give to patients. In addition to all of the other issues, right, the trap issues and the specific ban on telemedicine for abortion when no such ban exists for most other procedures. So there are a lot of problems with this bill. And just to illustrate how large this bill became, I wanted to show you the digest from this bill because it's huge, right? This is just the short version of what the bill does. The only real part that has to do with the title of the bill, like telemedicine abortion, is right here. prohibits the use of telemedicine to provide any abortion, including the writing and filling of prescription for any purposes that is intended to result in an abortion. That's large. That's like the part of the bill that would be kind of the core of the bill. A lot of the other stuff was added in either later or was when 1557 didn't move, was added in after that. So this is obviously like a big problem type of bill. So we put together some messaging around it. And yeah, and so we have a link for that bill as well. 1577 is one of those bills for this. There are a lot of different things. So even though in the messaging we're using for every action, we only have a few points of what makes the bill a problem. There are a lot of other ones. So one
Oops.
one other really good of Indiana. They're really.
Oh, he's back.
Oh, sorry. Hey guys, sorry about that. I have that rural internet. Thank you for your patience. Did you all get to 1577 before I fell out?
Yes.
Did.
All right, cool.
Yes.
Did you
Is
all-
there one to support the broadband expansion? Because you need that.
Right? I was gonna say, yeah, that might be it. I was gonna say I have to do collective process for these, so I can't just make them bills that make that for me. Although maybe I should do that because we do need broadband expansion.
Oh,
What is that one?
owner of a lonely heart.
Is that what it is?
Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
so much
Yeah.
that.
And then,
Oh,
It's
Is it?
yes,
I think it's, yeah.
yeah, that's yes.
yes. Mhm.
that's it.
Yeah.
One thing that
Thank you so much. It's been stuck in my head.
one thing that's been really interesting is that rural broadband is one of those like policy things that's almost like infrastructure week. It's been talked about for a very long time. I think I remember first hearing about the need for rural broadband in like 2006 or something.
Yeah, it was been a
And,
while.
And yet it eludes us for some reason.
For some reason.
Okay, is this something you want to listen to?
I
didn't realize.
so
Well, it's a community conversation and it seems to only be a few people on there. Matt Geyer, Chris Hegarty, a few people.
Erica, I can hear you.
Like, who's talking?
I'm so sorry. Hi, guys. I joined
Hi,
late.
Erica. What's
What I
up?
was doing.
You should tell everybody they should come on with us because that's a good
Uh-huh.
idea.
No, there's only a few people on here.
Right? Well, I know it's like we're scheduled up against the news in like, and it's also legislative stuff. So on a beautiful day. So I don't know. But
Yeah,
that's all right. We'll
a
have it
lot
up
of
on YouTube, and we're also going to have our forms up on the website. So we'll get people to call their legislators either way. All right. I think, are we ready to move on to our final one? All right,
Sure.
cool. We can get this done in time.
Oh no.
That broadband, he needs it.
Gonna have to just
that's
take a
not
line
wonderful.
from here to where Chris lives.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
All right,
Yes.
cool. All right, so we're going to talk about a couple of things really quick. These are somewhat, late arriving in terms of, well, they're not really late arriving at all, but they're sort of late breaking in terms of how they're developing. And those are HB 1005, and of course, it's the effect on the budget of bills like HB 1005. 1005 creates education savings accounts, or ESAs, and this allows eligible students who would otherwise be in public schools to receive grants for non-public education or unsupervised homeschooling. The bill also raises the income requirements for eligibility under the state's school choice voucher program, and I will scare quote school choice until the day I die, and nobody can stop me. HB 1001 also expands school choice programs by giving these programs a larger proportion of state money than before, right? Governor Holcomb's budget note had these pegged at, I think, $370 million or something like that. And then it's very likely that in terms of school choice programs, the House Republicans in education may in particular want to appropriate more for school choice. Chairman Benning has said that this is a very high priority for the Republican caucus this year. But one interesting thing is that not everybody is on board with this, right? There are a lot of people in both parties who have had issues with with sort of the privatization of Indiana schools under the school choice programs and the voucher programs, right? And this is kind of a set of issues that really seems complicated to a lot of folks, right? And I think our legislators like telling us that it's complicated because that absolves them of, they think that absolves them of responsibility for getting something done. But in reality, the state has taken over a large proportion of the funding apparatus for local schools and a large proportion of other funding and funding disbursement as regards public schools. And I just wanted to show you something that I thought was really illuminating for me when it comes to like, where is public money going, right? Is it going to public schools? Where's it going? Indiana Coalition for Public Education put out this graphic that I thought was a really succinct explanation of ESAs, choice scholarships, virtual charter schools, and then of course scholarship granting organizations. And a lot of those are different from what we're dealing with right now. We're really kind of just talking about ESAs and choice scholarships or vouchers. But it's kind of important to understand that these don't exist just as their own things. These exist as a set of educational policies that take money out of a pool of money that's intended for public education and move it toward non-accountable, non-public education services, many of which practice discrimination, particularly against LGBTQ folks, and many that also have sort of unpleasant histories in terms of discrimination against staff or waste, fraud, and abuse, right? So there are a lot of reasons why it's really great to support public schools, and it's because we know that over 90% of students go to public schools, and functioning public schools make everybody make our communities better. So oops. Sorry, I did a technology. All right. Boop. All right, so we have an advocacy form for this as well. This one's a little bit different, but we're gonna write a message to our Indiana senators urging them to oppose 1005 and the expansion of voucher programs in HB 1001. The link to the form's in the chat. And this is something where we kind of already know where our state senators are, at least locally, right? Senator Alting has been pretty good about this session about some of these issues. He didn't vote for 1005 in the Senate, and then of course on the opposite end of the spectrum is Senator Buchanan in Senate 7, my senator, who actually is carrying HB 1005 this cycle. But one thing that's important about these bills is that, and this is according to some folks I know who do much more educational lobbying in more official context than I do, but this is really something that has the potential to change people and to make people take notice in the legislature, because they know that education is an area that people take very seriously, and that if they're seen as not taking public education seriously, that will make them electorally vulnerable. So so that's one reason why, especially with education messaging, we really want to welcome them into doing a better job, because if they don't, we can probably find a school teacher to replace them in the next election cycle, right? We can just take a couple minutes to do those ones, and then we'll almost be done because we'll only have a couple more sort of rapid fire things to talk about. Hopefully my internet holds. All right, it's been a couple of minutes. Are folks ready to move on?
Yep.
All right.
I've been busy sharing.
Oh, thank you. Yes. All right, we'll take a minute to share. I'll just do a couple because I want to check and see. I want to check and see how many we got so far. Because one of the cool things about advocacy forums is that I can tell who's really doing it. I mean, who is it?
You got to snitch.
Yeah, I was gonna say it actually doesn't matter that much. I just like seeing the number go up. That's part of what we're doing here.
I'd be curious to hear from like Chris and Sheila if these automated forms are effective, or how, because like they say like an Indivisible like call, but I could also see like if they're just doing a tally, this would probably be fine. I'm just curious.
It's contextual and it depends, right?
Yeah.
The data kind of suggests that, there are a couple of reasons to do this. One of them is to move electeds on an issue. Another one is to gather data for our organization.
Oh,
But yeah, but one thing is that if people do get a large amount of emails, then yes, tallying them off is a way to look at them, particularly if it's something like that they know is in the news, right? So and by the way, a lot of times legislators are not looking at these themselves, particularly if they're a busier legislator, they're going to have a legislative aide looking at them. So even busier state representatives, so like I can imagine Representative Benning, he's not looking over all his emails. He's going to be getting a what do we call this? A rundown from somebody, right? And they're going to
Right.
say like, okay, well, we got a bunch of emails against HB 1005, and that's what people are going to hear. So I do think that sometimes, and I know Chris does check her own email, right? So so she
Yeah,
might
she does.
see some of the stuff, right? In that,
Mhm.
but I do know that there are other representatives who like for whom it might be a bit more effective, right?
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think of course with Chris is already going to vote our way on a lot of things,
Well,
right?
yeah, but
And so
but
she's just going to have to put up with a little bit of spam.
but getting email from us helps support her
Oh
doing
yeah,
that,
absolutely,
right?
right? And that's kind of something we can always like if there are electeds who are in our corner, it reinforces that, like that's where we want them, right? And eventually we'll be able to send out, once I have every action figured out a bit better, we'll be able to send out differentiated emails. So we can say, okay, but if it's this person, it will say, thank you for carrying this bill, right? So that could be something that we can look into later on, but let's look at some emerging bills, right? And Susan brought this one up. So Susan, you're on. Do you want to talk about this for a minute? Because I know that you brought this up in Slack, and it's something that like I saw it and I was like, what is this?
Yeah, I couldn't actually speaking of Chris, I'll give her credit. She's the one that was like, hey, is this a normal Medicaid thing? Because I work in healthcare. And I was like, I don't think so. So I said I sent her a whole bunch of stuff. But yeah, it's the good news is that they're trying to expand or make sure that they can pay schools appropriately for whatever schools normally can get Medicaid for, which I'm not an expert in. But there's this little section in there. It's like, but they absolutely cannot perform abortions. Like you're going to do that at a school, but can't refer for abortions, can't have contraceptives, can't have referrals for, counseling for. And it was like, no, I don't. And so I actually sent back to her, and I'm happy to share with anyone else a bunch of data of the support of the improved outcomes from having that contraception in schools, from the College of Obstetrics and Gynecology and some other organizations. So yeah, definitely we don't want that particular, there's parts of it that are fine where they, expand other professionals for payment. And that's great, but that's just that section is a little questionable, or a little more than questionable.
Great. Thanks for bringing that up, and thanks for talking to Chris about it, because that's what we need to see. Yeah, because I know that Medicaid billing has like been an issue for a lot of folks. That's sort of I know when we do or when the Mental Health Alliance does the forum every year, and of course Rebecca's on this as well, so she can probably speak to this better than me.
Yeah.
But that's kind of been a big issue in Indiana is just the Medicaid billing scheme in general. So so thanks
hey,
for
can I interrupt one second?
Absolutely.
Because
Yes.
on Lisa's question about the auto-generated emails, because I'm on the advocacy and policy for my National Professional Association, and they use the heck out of those. So there must be something, that they wouldn't continue using it if it wasn't effective. We've done a lot of grassroots stuff with that and in the past on some coding issues and stuff for health information management. So I don't have data, but I can tell you that it's really, if you make it easy, more people will communicate.
Yep. And honestly, I find it even as I'm like writing them and kind of making templates and stuff like that, I find it's easier for me to pull one out and do one myself if I have a template for it, even if I'm the person who wrote the template. So I feel like, like a lot of times if there's a form there, it's easier to get to. And one thing that I kind of tried to do with these and I'm not sure how well it comes off, is that the parts that are not editable by the user of the form look very, very generic, as if they could just be anybody greeting them, right? Because they just have a very standard greeting and a very standard closing. So I mean, they might look like a form letter in some way, but the language is so truncated at the beginning. It just says, "Hi, I'm this person, and I'm reaching about this bill," right?
Yeah.
So I try to make them a little bit so they wouldn't read as form email-y as some of them. But obviously that's something that we're gonna discover together as we continue to do calls to action, is how we can write them differently. All right, and then the other bill that's to watch is Senate Bill 389. And I actually asked somebody to be on and talk more about this tonight, but unfortunately they couldn't make it. But this is the complete repeal of the bipartisan wetlands bill. This would leave seasonal and disconnected wetlands unprotected. This might not actually move because the House Environmental Committee hasn't met this session. And it might be that it doesn't move for that reason. But it does look like that it's getting some press, mostly negative press, because of the association of the bill's authors with developers and developer interest groups. So that's something to watch, and I'll try to learn more about where that is in the next coming days. And if anybody has any information about that, we'd really appreciate it, because obviously we don't. It's not good. We have a huge problem with agricultural pollution in this state, which is another set of issues, right? Another set of issues, especially with confined animal feeding operations, and repealing wetlands bills combined with the growth in confined animal feeding operations in the state is alarming, right? It's alarming, and of course we are also, I think, in terms of other terms of types of pollution, so in air pollution, doing very, very badly as a state. So.
Can I ask a question? Just
Absolutely.
because this is definitely not an area I know much about. So what's their purpose? Like, what do they think the positive outcome is by repealing this?
Okay, right. Yeah, and I mean, I do have a little bit of a background. When I was in college, environmental policy was kind of my subject area. But one of the reasons that that's given is that it would make development easier, and that it would make life easier on farmers, right? And by farmers, that's like kind of almost a code word at this point. It's coded for us to sometimes we think of like the nice family farmer. It really means a gigantic family farm, or sorry, not family farm, a gigantic corporate farm. But it would make it easier for them to develop or different sections of land, right? That may or may not be protected. The issue is that under the Indiana wetlands law, it's largely unenforced and difficult to enforce as it is. So a lot of these farmers who say that it would be difficult for them to farm on a section of wetland in the areas that they own probably could do it anyway. And I'm not saying that that's like a great way to deal with a regulatory scheme, but what I'm saying is that it's not a great regulatory scheme for dealing with isolated wetlands anyway, but it will become no scheme at all when this law goes through. But yeah, the pretext is farmers, but in truth, it's probably going to be more about other types of development as well.
Cool, thank you.
No problem. And it kind of sounds, it's one of those things that sounds kind of not like, if you don't really like have that framework, then it doesn't sound very convincing. But for some folks, it is convincing to hear like the idea that a farmer can't grow his soybeans because of the big government telling him that there's a little frog he has to be careful from, right? To some people that appeals, but I think probably the more important messaging around that would be like, the value of Indiana's 1% of wetlands that we have left, right? How we can work together to protect those. So that's kind of what we're looking at right now. Does anybody have? Oh, sorry. Oops. And then for our last thing, are there any other bills that people have seen? I know that there are a lot of bills up and moving in the session, so I just wanted to hold some space for folks. If you had anything that you wanted to share about that's moving in the State House.
I haven't tracked whether they're moving or not, but do you know the status of all the ones that we're trying to stop public health from being able to to regulate on an emergency, like all the ones that
Yeah.
were like that.
There were a couple that dealt with county level governments. I believe the worst of those in terms of the bill number one is not going to move.
Okay, cool.
But I'll have to check because I think that there are a couple other bills that could have already popped up in because it's germane to a couple of other things,
Yeah.
right? That was an issue with the Senate bill with 353 was that they just took out the election law stuff and replaced it with other election law related stuff. So, but yeah.
I would say House Bill 1001, which is the budget, they're wanting to cut mental health and substance abuse,
Mhm.
which makes sense during a pandemic. So says no one, but they want to cut it. I can't remember the number, but it's a lot. And so I know that Mental Health America is encouraging people to contact their legislators to, put that funding back in.
Cool.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I missed what was that one?
It's the budget bill, so HB 1001.
Okay. Thank you.
The other thing Mental Health America is advocating for is, well, not advocating for, HB 1369 is the everyone gets a gun bill. Like it gets rid of the concealed carry permit, whatever. And they're really honestly being honest about the fact that it will probably become law and pass. So what they're really pushing is suicide prevention and education to gun sellers and business people in an attempt to try to mitigate that. Because we know that if there's a weapon in the house and you are contemplating death by suicide, there's an increase. You have a more likely chance of that, act happening.
Tennessee passed something, that gun legislation already, something similar. So,
And I believe there was another bill out there. It might have been 1008. I know I called in about it regarding the background checks, and I hadn't heard whether that's moved or not, but I'm trying to keep an eye on that. So there are several bills out there regarding guns that just aren't good. I just don't know if they've made any movement or not yet.
Right. Yeah, I was gonna say I'm already going out into my my IGA thing really quick. Yeah, I think that there are someone off the top of my head. I don't think 1008 is moving, but I'll have to check later. Yeah. All right. Sorry, I'll do one more screen share because I do have one more slide to show y'all. All right, and the screen I have shared is a special thanks screen. And thanks to Becky for dropping the links today, and thanks to Matt for what's the word, facilitating all the technology, right, or Zoom and other things like that to make this work out. And then also when I'm doing legislative research and when other folks are doing legislative research, a lot of times we'll go to activist and advocacy organizations from around the state. So special thanks in particular to the ACLU of Indiana, Planned Parenthood Advocates of Indiana, Kentucky, Indiana Coalition for Public Education, Hoosier Environmental Council, Younger Women's Task Force, Greater Lafayette, Surge, Greater Lafayette Immigrant Allies, and the League of Women Voters, because those are all kind of places where we're taking some expertise and we're really grateful for all those orgs because that's how we know in large part what we're going to be for and what we're going to be advocating against. All right, does anybody else have any like comments, questions, so we can end this and enjoy our evenings?
Good job,
So doing
Chris.
this,
Thank
Chris.
you.
Thank
Yeah,
you for
this
doing
was
it.
Very
Yeah.
helpful.
Yeah.